It's pretty wild when you think about it. The country that literally invented the transistor, the very foundation of our modern world, is now in this knockdown, drag-out fight to win back its manufacturing crown. And the rival? It's one they never, ever saw coming. All right, let's just get right into the numbers because they are staggering. When we talk about the most advanced, most powerful chips, the brains behind everything from your phone to AI, one single company in Taiwan, TSMC, makes 92% of them. Let that sink in. 92%. That other tiny little slice, that 8%, yeah, that's the rest of the entire world combined, the US included. So the big question, the one we're going to unpack here, is how did the country that started it all lose the race so badly? Well, it wasn't one big mistake. It was more like a fork in the road, taken decades ago, leading to two completely different destinations.
So let's rewind. It all starts with two very different ideas about how to build an industry. Ideas that sprouted up on opposite sides of the Pacific Ocean and ended up changing, well, pretty much everything.
Back in the 80s, American tech companies hit a crossroads. Building chip factories, or fabs, was getting crazy expensive. So they made a really smart business decision, or so it seemed at the time. They said, you know what? Let's focus on the fun, high-profit part, designing the chips. We'll let someone else handle the messy, super expensive manufacturing. That was the fabless model. At the very same time, over in Taiwan, this guy, Morris Chang, had a brilliant and totally opposite idea. He started TSMC with a simple promise. We will only build chips for you. We will never, ever design our own. He created what's called a pure-play foundry, a neutral factory for hire, and that changed the game.
And for a while, this was a match made in heaven. It was a perfect partnership. The US fabless model let loose this incredible wave of creativity. Suddenly, you had companies like NVIDIA and Qualcomm who could design the most amazing chips in the world without needing billions of dollars to build a factory. And who did they call to make them? Their reliable partner, TSMC. It was the perfect win-win. It fueled the Silicon Valley boom.
But, and this is the big but, over time, that beautiful partnership started to look a lot more like a dangerous dependency. You see, while the US was busy optimizing for profit and efficiency, it didn't realize it was slowly, piece by piece, handing over the keys to the entire kingdom. It gave up control of the physical stuff, the actual making of things. And what really threw gasoline on this fire was the fact that America's own homegrown champion, the big one, Intel, started to stumble. While all these nimble, fabless companies were taking off, the giant of the industry began to trip over its own feet, and that created a massive opening for everyone else. And this timeline right here really tells the story of what's often called Intel's lost decade. They got stuck. They made this huge bet on their next generation 10-nanometer chip process. And just remember, with chips, the smaller the number, the more powerful it is. And they just couldn't get it to work. It was delayed for years. And while Intel was spinning its wheels, its rivals like AMD just went to TSMC, got their chips made on a more advanced process, and completely blew past them. They didn't just catch up, they leapfrogged them. So what went wrong? Well, ironically, Intel's greatest strength became its biggest weakness. See, they did everything in-house. Their factories only made chips for their own designers. Think of it like a chef who only ever cooks for his own family. You can get a little comfortable, right? TSMC, on the other hand, was like a restaurant with hundreds of different, demanding customers every single night. They had to be on top of their game, constantly innovating, or they'd go out of business. That pressure made them sharper, faster, and ultimately, better. This kicked off a really vicious cycle. The more Intel stumbled, the more its competitors, like AMD and NVIDIA, sent their business and their money over to TSMC. That cash infusion, plus the experience of making all these different high-performance chips, just helped TSMC accelerate even faster. It's just wild. Intel's own failures were literally paying for their rivals' rise to the top. Now, for a long time, this whole system, America designs, Asia builds, it worked. It seemed fine. But then two massive global crises hit, one right after the other, and suddenly everyone realized just how fragile this whole arrangement was. It was like a giant wake-up call, especially in Washington. First up, the pandemic. It created this perfect storm in the supply chain. You might remember this. Car companies thought nobody would be buying cars, so they canceled their chip orders. Big mistake. When demand came roaring back, they were at the end of a very, very long line. The result? Empty dealership lots and a hit to the auto industry of about $110 billion in just 1 year. But as bad as that was, it was really just an economic headache. The real nightmare scenario is geopolitical. Remember that 92% number? Having almost all of the world's most critical chips made in Taiwan, which is right at the center of one of the world's biggest geopolitical flashpoints, well, that's a massive vulnerability. We're talking about a potential military blockade wiping out something like $2.7 trillion from the global economy. It would be an absolute catastrophe. And that's when the light bulb went off in Washington. This wasn't just about supply chains or economics anymore. The humble computer chip was no longer just a commodity. It was a strategic weapon. And the idea that a potential adversary could control the supply of that weapon, that turned this into a full-blown national security crisis. So, backed into a corner, the U.S. decided to fight back. And it's a two-pronged attack. First, a massive injection of government money to bring manufacturing home. And second, a complete, radical change in strategy from Intel itself. The big gun in this fight is the CHIPS Act. And look, this isn't just some small subsidy. We're talking about a massive, nearly $280 billion plan. It's basically the government saying, hey companies, if you build your next-gen chip factories here in the United States, we will help you pay for it. There's money for construction, big tax credits, and cash for research and training a whole new generation of engineers. And right alongside that, Intel, under its new CEO, Pat Gelsinger, is attempting one of the biggest corporate turnarounds ever. They're calling it IDM 2.0, and it completely flips their old model on its head. Now, they'll still use their own factories, sure, but they'll also use other foundries, even TSMC, if it gives them an edge. And here's the kicker. They're opening up their own factories to everyone else. They're basically saying, we're going to become a foundry and compete directly with TSMC. And they are not messing around. They've put a date on it. They want to be back on top, to have the world's best chip technology by 2025. The plan hinges on this new process they're calling 18A. And it's not just talk. They've already landed a huge customer for it, Microsoft. That's a massive vote of confidence that they might actually be able to pull this off. Okay, so the money's there. The plan is in motion, but this is going to be a serious uphill battle. This is not something you can just fix by throwing a bunch of money at it. There are some really deep, fundamental problems that have been building up for decades. First off, let's just talk pure costs. It's just brutally expensive to build these things in the US. I mean, TSMC themselves said their new factory in Arizona is costing them 4 to 5 times what an identical factory would cost back in Taiwan. And on top of that, you have to pay your engineers way more here, like 3 times as much. The CHIPS Act helps soften that blow, for sure, but it doesn't make the problem go away. And you know what's even harder to find than money? People, the right people. The industry is going to need like 90,000 new skilled workers in the next few years. The problem is, for the last 30 years, America hasn't just been outsourcing manufacturing. It's been outsourcing manufacturing knowledge. That whole generation of hands-on expertise is just gone. And we're seeing the results already with delays at these new plants because they can't find enough people to install the equipment. And finally, a chip fab isn't an island. It needs a whole ecosystem around it to survive. Part of Taiwan's secret sauce isn't just TSMC. It's the web of hundreds of other companies right nearby that supply all the specialized chemicals, parts, and services. That ecosystem in the US has been hollowed out, and one of the biggest gaps is in what's called advanced packaging. So you could have this ridiculous situation where a state-of-the-art chip is made in Arizona, only to be put on a plane and flown all the way back to Asia just for the final assembly steps. So, that brings us to the big final question, right? America has the money now. It has the political will. But after decades of being told that the smart move was to design things here and make them somewhere else, can it really rebuild not just the factories, but an entire culture of making things, a culture of manufacturing excellence? That's the real challenge. The race is on, and honestly, the future of technology is riding on the answer.
How did the United States, the very birthplace of the transistor back in, 1947 at Bell Labs, how did it end up not just losing its edge, but actually fighting for scraps in the high-end chip manufacturing game? Seems almost unbelievable.
It really is a stunning reversal. You know, you'd think the inventor, the pioneer, would maintain that dominance.
Right.
But when you look at the numbers today, the sheer scale of this shift is just staggering. Taiwan's TSMC holds a near total monopoly. We're talking 92% of the advanced semiconductor manufacturing market share.
92%.
Yeah.
That number is hard to even grasp. So you're saying essentially the entire manufacturing future, or almost all of it, ended up with one company, leaving just, 8% split between U.S. companies like Intel and a few others globally?
That's the reality. And our mission today really is to unpack how this happened. What were the critical decisions, the strategic choices, maybe even the missteps on both sides of the Pacific that led to this incredible disparity?
Yeah, because our sources suggest this isn't some overnight miracle for TSMC. It's more like the predictable, maybe inevitable outcome of decades of specific economic policies and strategic choices, seemingly rational choices at the time, perhaps.
Exactly. Predictable consequences, even if unintended. So this deep dive, we'll look at that divergence that really started back in the 1980s. We'll examine Intel's stumbles, the American champion losing its tech lead, and then we'll try to evaluate if the current U.S. counteroffensive, the huge GPS Act, Intel's big turnaround plan, if it actually has a realistic shot at regaining ground against that 92% figure.
Okay, let's dig in. The 1980s. You're saying that's the key moment, the great divergence point identified in our sources.
That's where the paths really split, because in the 80s, the cost to build and operate a state-of-the-art semiconductor factory, a fab, just started to explode.
Explode how? Like, what kind of numbers are we talking?
We're talking hundreds of millions, rapidly escalating towards billions of dollars just for one fab. It became this massive capital expenditure burden.
Okay, so U.S. companies hit this financial wall. A crossroads, you called it.
A real existential choice. Option 1. Stick with the old model. Keep pouring colossal, ever-increasing sums into hardware, into manufacturing, into facility upkeep, the integrated model.
Which meant accepting slower returns, maybe massive debt loads.
Precisely. Or option 2. Pivot. And this is the path most U.S. companies took. They decided, let's focus on our core strengths, which were what? High-margin stuff, chip design, R&D, and critically, owning the intellectual property, the IP.
The thinking being, why own the hugely expensive factory if someone else can handle the manufacturing, possibly cheaper?
Exactly. They opted for financial optimization. And that decision gave birth to the fabless model. You know, from a shareholder perspective, from a board perspective, it looked incredibly smart.
Oh, so?
Well, by outsourcing production, these U.S. companies shed the crushing weight of factory operating costs, the construction debt, the constant need for those multi-billion-dollar upgrades every few years just to stay competitive on the manufacturing side.
Okay, and that choice had immediate economic effects, right? It wasn't just about saving money.
Oh, definitely. It created a much lighter, more flexible capital structure. Think about it suddenly. The barrier to entry for a new chip company wasn't $10 billion for a fab. It was having a brilliant design team.
So it lowered the bar for innovation on the design side.
Completely. All the resources, all the investment could be channeled directly into R&D, into design innovation. It fueled the rise of software and design-led companies.
And the winners were?
The winners were the companies that embraced this purely fabless approach. The design powerhouses we know today. NVIDIA, Qualcomm, later AMD after it spun off its fabs. They poured everything into designing the world's best chips, GPUs for AI, mobile processors, you name it. Their competitive advantage was purely in the IP.
So for a while, the U.S. felt pretty secure, right? Dominating the highest value part of the chain, the design.
Absolutely. It looked like a winning strategy. High margins, less capital risk. What could go wrong?
But while the U.S. was busy optimizing balance sheets, you're saying Taiwan was laying the groundwork to capture the physical manufacturing control.
Yeah.
How did that happen? What was their motivation?
Their motivation was fundamentally different. It wasn't driven by quarterly earnings. It was driven by national strategy. Leaders there, people like Sun Yat-sen and KT Lee, they looked at their economy reliant on textiles, basic manufacturing, and saw a dead end.
They feared the middle income track.
Exactly. They saw investing in cutting-edge, high-tech manufacturing as the only way for Taiwan to sustain growth and move up the global value chain. It was an economic necessity for them.
And they didn't just hope it would happen. The government actively intervened.
Actively built the ecosystem. They set up ITRI, the Industrial Technology Research Institute, sort of an incubator for tech transfer and talent. They created the Hsinchu Science Park, basically a state-sponsored tech hub. And crucially, they went out and recruited top Chinese-American talent working in the U.S. Offering them significant backing, resources, the chance to build something big back home. And that recruitment drive led them to Morris Chang,
The Texas Instruments veteran.
a highly respected figure at TI. Chang saw the gap created by the U.S. fabless shift. He saw these brilliant U.S. design engineers with great ideas, but no way to afford a multi-billion-dollar fab.
So he saw the need for a dedicated manufacturer.
He saw the need, and he also predicted correctly that advanced manufacturing would likely shift to Asia anyway, skilled labor, government support, costs.
And the Taiwanese government backed him. Seriously backed him.
Unprecedented backing. The government put up 48.3% of the initial capital for TSMC, about $100 million back in 1987. That's serious seed money from the state.
And with that backing, Chang launched TSMC with his revolutionary model, the pure play foundry.
This is the absolute key moment, the pivot point. Unlike Intel's IDM model, or other companies that might sometimes sell spare capacity, TSMC made a foundational commitment. We only do contract manufacturing. We build chips based only on our customers' designs. Big customers, tiny startups, didn't matter.
And the crucial promise.
Yeah.
The one that built the empire.
The promise. We will never design our own chips. We will never compete with you, our customer.
Wow. So that built trust.
Absolute unbreakable trust. Think about it from NVIDIA's perspective. You're handing over your most secret designs, your crown jewels. You have to know the manufacturer won't steal them and launch a competing product. TSMC's promise guaranteed neutrality.
Making them the go-to partner for all those U.S. fabless companies.
The perfect partner. And the Taiwanese government reinforced this, ensuring TSMC focused solely on manufacturing leadership, keeping that advanced tech concentrated on the island.
So initially it looked like a perfect symbiosis, right? U.S. designs created huge demand.
And TSMC stepped in perfectly to meet that supply need. It fueled innovation on both sides for years. A classic win-win.
But somewhere along the line, that win-win shifted.
It shifted subtly, almost invisibly at first. As chip complexity kept increasing and fab costs kept climbing, we're talking $20 billion plus for a leading-edge fab. Now those U.S. companies, chasing that quarterly financial efficiency, they didn't realize they were slowly giving up physical control over the entire supply chain.
The partnership hardened into dependency.
Exactly. That beneficial relationship solidified into a critical strategic dependency on Taiwan's manufacturing prowess, which leads us right into the story of Intel.
Right, part 2. Intel's decade of loss. While everyone else was going fabless, Intel stuck to its guns with the integrated device manufacturer, the IDM model.
They were fiercely committed to it. Design and manufacturing, all under one roof. And for decades, that integration was their superpower. It allowed incredible optimization between design and process. They were the undisputed king.
But that strength became a weakness.
It did, especially as Moore's law started hitting physical walls in the 2010s. That rigid, self-contained structure started showing cracks.
Our sources point to internal culture issues, too. Complacency after decades of dominance. Bureaucracy.
That's a big part of it. Success bred rigidity. The manufacturing division primarily served an internal client, Intel's own design teams. It lacked that intense, daily, external competitive pressure that TSMC faced.
TSMC had hundreds of demanding customers threatening to leave if they slipped up.
Exactly. Apple, AMD, NVIDIA, they demanded constant innovation, better yields, lower costs. If TSMC faltered, they'd walk. Intel's internal fab division didn't have that same fire under its feet. It led to slower decision-making and inability to pivot quickly when things went wrong.
And the cost burden must have been immense, right? TSMC spread its costs across the globe's designers.
Huge difference. TSMC ran its fabs at maximum capacity, serving everyone. Massive economies of scale, lower cost per chip. Intel had to carry that same $10–20 billion fab cost mostly by itself, often running below full capacity. And their pride in the IDM model made them slow to even consider outsourcing when they hit technical roadblocks.
Which brings us to the big one.
Yeah.
The 10-nanometer disaster.
Oh, the 10-nanometer node. That was the turning point. Intel got ambitious. Very ambitious. They aimed for a 2.7x jump in transistor density over their previous 14-millimeter process.
Compared to the usual Moore's Law target of
About 2x. So they were trying to leapfrog not just the competition, but maybe even the realistic physics and engineering capabilities at the time.
And they stumbled. Badly.
The technical complexity, combined with some specific engineering choices they made, led to terrible manufacturing yields. They just couldn't produce enough working chips reliably. It wasn't a small delay. We're talking multi-year delays. Intel was basically paralyzed, stuck trying to fix fundamental problems with that 10-nanometer process.
While Intel was stuck in the mud.
Their rivals saw the opening of a lifetime. AMD specifically. AMD went to TSMC, used their increasingly mature and reliable 7nm process, and launched new CPUs.
And those CPUs were
Faster, more power efficient. They suddenly leapfrogged Intel in performance in key areas. Intel was forced to keep refreshing its older 14mm technology, putting new labels on slightly tweaked old chips just to stay in the game. It was painful to watch.
And it didn't stop at 10mm, did it? The problems continued.
The follow-up process, their 7nm equivalent, also faced significant delays. And that led to the ultimate unthinkable concession for Intel, having to outsource production of critical parts, like their high-performance GPUs, to their direct competitor, TSMC, who now had the superior manufacturing process.
So it wasn't just a technical slip. It was a failure of culture, of strategy, maybe born from that long period of being untouchable.
Absolutely. And ironically, Intel's stumbles were the final catalyst that truly cemented TSMC's dominance. As Intel struggled, all that high-volume business from AMD, NVIDIA, and others flowed directly to TSMC, funding their R&D, helping them perfect their processes even faster. TSMC went from being just a contract manufacturer to the undisputed technology leader.
Okay, so the U.S. industry was comfortable with outsourcing for a long time because it was efficient. But then came the rude awakening. Part 3, the wake-up call. Starting with COVID-19.
Yeah, the pandemic was a brutal lesson. It hit both supply and demand simultaneously, exposing just how fragile that centralized global system had become.
On the demand side, work from home, remote learning.
Massive, sudden surge in demand for PCs, laptops, network gear, cloud infrastructure. Everyone needed more chips right now.
And the auto industry famously miscalculated, didn't they?
Big time.
But
They panicked early, canceled chip orders thinking a recession was coming. But then demand snapped back, and they found themselves at the very end of a very long queue for semiconductor supply. Production lines shut down worldwide.
so demand spikes while supply.
Supply got hammered. Lockdowns shut down or slowed fabs. Inventory, already lean because of just-in-time practices, evaporated. Then you had those compounding factors, the fire at the Renesas plant in Japan, the Texas freeze hitting fabs there. It was a perfect storm.
The result being the global chip shortage we all felt. Paralyzing industries.
Hugely damaging. The auto sector alone, as you mentioned, lost something like $110 billion in revenue in 2021 due to lost production. That really drove home the economic danger. Relying on a couple of hubs in Asia wasn't just a theoretical risk anymore. It was an immediate, costly reality.
But even that economic shock was soon dwarfed by a bigger fear, right? The geopolitical angle.
Exactly. TSMC's dominance turned Taiwan into the single point of failure, the Silicon Shield, as it's called. Suddenly, the fact that 90% of the world's most advanced chips were made in one specific, politically sensitive location became a massive source of anxiety.
The Taiwan Strait. A major flashpoint.
Arguably the major flashpoint. And having the world's most critical resource concentrated right there, that gave policymakers, especially in Washington, nightmares.
So what were the scenarios analysts were modeling?
They were alarming. A Chinese military blockade, even without a full invasion, could halt chip production almost instantly. The estimated economic cost, something like $2.7 trillion globally in the first year alone, just from the tech supply chain collapsing.
When a full conflict.
Catastrophic. Estimates ran upwards of $10 trillion in global economic damage. Destroying those fabs would mean losing decades of investment and expertise. It would set back global technology, AI, communications, military tech by years, maybe longer.
So for Washington, this became an unacceptable risk. The idea of Beijing potentially controlling the global supply of advanced chips.
It was simply intolerable from a national security perspective. Chips were no longer just components, they were instruments of geopolitical power. That existential threat, even more than the supply chain disruption, forced the U.S. government's hand.
Which brings us to part 4, the counterattack, the U.S. response. A major policy shift.
A historic shift, really, moving away from decades of relatively hands-off industrial policy towards active intervention. We haven't seen something quite like this since maybe the space race or the Cold War.
The centerpiece being the CTYPS and Science Act of August 2022.
Right, and it's crucial to understand this isn't just throwing money at the problem. It's a comprehensive strategy aiming to rebuild U.S. leadership across the entire semiconductor value chain, R&D, design, manufacturing, packaging, workforce development, soup to nuts.
The price tag is huge, around $280 billion total commitment. How does that break down?
3 main buckets. First, the direct incentives. $39 billion in manufacturing grants. This is cash to entice companies Intel, TSMC, Samsung to build or expand advanced fabs in the United States, directly countering that Asian cost advantage.
Okay, direct subsidies. What else?
Second, tackling the huge upfront cost of building these multi-billion-dollar facilities. A 25% investment tax credit for semiconductor manufacturing equipment. That helps lower the initial financial hurdle.
And the third piece.
Third, and maybe the most critical long-term element, $13 billion for R&D and workforce development. This acknowledges that just building factories isn't enough. You need the research pipeline and, crucially, the skilled people to run them.
So the goal isn't just some domestic manufacturing. It's about significantly boosting the U.S. share of advanced chip production below 10 nanometers and building a resilient domestic supply chain.
Precisely. For both economic security and national security, it spurred a wave of announcements for new fab projects almost immediately.
And in parallel, Intel launched its own counterattack, right? Under new leadership.
Yes. CEO Pat Gelsinger returned in 2021, a former Intel engineer himself. He basically came in and said, the old IDM model failed us. He launched the ambitious IDM 2.0 strategy.
IDM 2.0. What does that mean in practice? How is it different?
It's designed for flexibility, the opposite of the old rigid Intel. 3 main pillars. 1, maintain internal production for their core CPU products. That stays in-house.
Okay.
2, significantly increase the use of external foundries, meaning use TSMC or others when it makes sense for certain components, like GPUs or chiplets. Use the best available technology on the market. Don't wait for an internal fix if it's lagging.
More pragmatism. And the third pillar.
The big one. Launching Intel Foundry Services, IFS. Intel is opening its factory doors and becoming a contract manufacturer for other companies, competing head-to-head with TSMC and Samsung. They want to build chips for Qualcomm, for Amazon, maybe even Apple someday.
That's a huge strategic shift, becoming a competitor to the company they sometimes rely on for manufacturing.
It's a massive gamble. And the success of this whole strategy hinges on Intel regaining technology leadership with its manufacturing processes.
Which leads to their incredibly aggressive roadmap. 5 nodes in 4 years. That sounds ambitious.
Extremely ambitious, almost bordering on marketing slogan territory, but they are genuinely betting the company on it. It culminates in a process called Intel 18A. That's like a 1.8 nanometer equivalent.
How do they plan to achieve that leap? What's the tech?
They're relying heavily on 2 key innovations they believe will give them an edge. First is RibbonFET. This is Intel's version of gate-all-around transistors. Instead of the gate sitting on top of the silicon channel, it wraps around it on all sides.
Better control, less leakage?
Exactly. Better electrical control, less current leakage, improved power efficiency. That's the theory.
And the second innovation?
PowerVia. This is backside power delivery. Think of a chip like a skyscraper. Traditionally, power lines and signal lines run on the same levels, causing congestion. PowerVia moves the power delivery network to the underside of the silicon wafer,
freeing up space on top for more transistors.
Precisely. It frees up valuable real estate on the front side for better signaling and potentially denser logic. Intel believes RibbonFET plus PowerVia will put them back in the lead over TSMC by 2025.
Are there any early signs this gamble might pay off?
Some positive indicators, yes. Reports suggest the manufacturing yields for 18A are improving, maybe even ahead of where Samsung is with similar tech. That's crucial. You need good yields to be commercially viable.
And they've landed a big customer for IFS, haven't they?
Yes. Microsoft committed to using Intel's 18A process for a custom chip design. That's huge validation. A major tech giant trusting Intel's new foundry with a critical project.
Any other potential customers sniffing around?
Industry buzz suggests serious talks are happening with NVIDIA, Broadcom, even AMD potentially using IFS for some things. If those deals happen, it would be a massive boost for Intel's foundry ambitions, giving them the scale they need.
Okay, so huge government investment, a revitalized Intel with ambitious tech. It sounds like a powerful counterpunch.
Yeah.
But part 5, the steep climb. Our sources warn the challenges are enormous, right? Things that money alone can't fix.
Absolutely. The CHIPS Act funding is essential, but it's just the starting point. The structural hurdles are immense. First off, the basic cost disparity.
Meaning it just costs way more to build and run these things in the U.S.
Dramatically more. TSMC themselves said their Arizona fab construction costs were 4 to 5 times higher than building the same thing in Taiwan. 4 to 5 times. That's before you even turn the lights on. The subsidies are just to level the playing field initially.
And operating costs are higher too. labor, utilities.
Significantly higher. Labor is a big one. That example you mentioned, a semiconductor engineer in Phoenix making around $117,000 versus maybe $32,000 in Taiwan, plus higher costs for energy, water, stricter regulations, it all adds up. Without ongoing subsidies, it's very hard to compete purely on cost with Asian fabs.
Okay, so cost is a major, persistent challenge. But maybe even bigger is the skills and knowledge gap.
This might be the toughest nut to crack. Decades of outsourcing didn't just move factories, it moved the know-how. An entire generation of hands-on, practical manufacturing expertise left the U.S.
We basically stopped training people for these highly specialized manufacturing roles.
Pretty much. The talent pipeline dried up. Now, estimates suggest the U.S. needs 70,000 to 90,000 new skilled workers, technicians, engineers, just for the fabs currently being built, just by the end of this decade. Some forecasts go way higher, maybe 300,000 needed long-term across the whole supply chain.
Where are these workers going to come from?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question. While Taiwanese engineers were gaining daily experience in the world's most advanced fabs, the U.S. workforce shifted heavily towards design and software. Manufacturing just wasn't seen as a desirable or even available career path for many. Rebuilding that pipeline takes years, decades even, of focused education and training initiatives.
And we're already seeing the impact of this shortage, aren't we? Delays.
Yes. Both Intel and TSMC have publicly acknowledged significant difficulties finding enough skilled construction workers and, crucially, equipment installation technicians for their massive new projects in Arizona and Ohio.
Leading to that really stark example.
Yeah.
TSMC, flying in hundreds of workers from Taiwan.
Yeah, flying in experienced technicians, engineers, specialists from Taiwan just to get the equipment installed and calibrated in their Arizona fab. That tells you everything you need to know about the depth of the skills gap right now.
Okay, so cost skills was the third major challenge, the missing ecosystem.
Right. Building the big, shiny fab building is one thing, but semiconductor manufacturing relies on this incredibly dense, complex ecosystem of supporting companies.
What kind of companies are we talking about?
Hundreds of them. Suppliers of specialized gases, ultra-pure chemicals, specialized materials, companies that service the multi-million-dollar manufacturing equipment, design support services, testing facilities, packaging houses. In Taiwan, particularly around Hsinchu Science Park, these suppliers are often clustered geographically right next to the fabs.
Allowing for quick collaboration, problem solving.
Lightning fast. If there's a problem with a chemical purity or a piece of equipment needs urgent maintenance, the experts are often just down the road. It creates incredible efficiency and resilience.
And the U.S. ecosystem.
It's much more fragmented. Decades of offshoring hollowed out large parts of it. We lack domestic capacity in several key areas of this support network.
Which brings us to maybe the most critical missing piece you mentioned, advanced packaging.
This is a huge one. Even if the U.S. succeeds in making the most advanced silicon wafers, the raw pattern discs in Arizona or Ohio, using Intel's 18A or whatever comes next.
So those wafers likely still need to be shipped back to Asia.
Very likely, yes. For the final critical steps of advanced packaging and testing. Packaging isn't just putting the chip in its plastic case anymore. It's incredibly complex, stacking multiple chips, connecting them with tiny microbumps, so-called 2.5D or 3D packaging, ensuring they work together flawlessly.
And the expertise and capacity for that advanced packaging is mostly concentrated in Asia.
Overwhelmingly so. Rebuilding that entire complex packaging and testing supply chain, the materials, the equipment, the skilled workforce domestically is another monumental task. It's arguably outside the main focus of the current CHIPS Act, which is heavily geared towards front-end wafer fabrication. Until that packaging piece is on shore, you still have a major supply chain vulnerability.
What a complex picture.
Yeah.
So wrapping this up, our deep dive shows this chip war. It's less about who invented the transistor way back when.
And much more about who had the better long-term strategy, the national will to invest consistently, maybe the cultural agility to adapt to skyrocketing complexity. The U.S. focus on short-term financial optimization, while rational at the time, led to this long-term strategic vulnerability.
The U.S. has definitely woken up now, stirred by the pandemic and geopolitics.
Yeah.
But the challenge of rebuilding what was willingly given away over decades is just immense.
It really is. The sources are clear. Just throwing money isn't enough. You have to tackle the fundamental cost structures, rebuild the talent pipeline from the ground up, and recreate that entire intricate manufacturing ecosystem. It's a generational challenge.
So Intel and the U.S. are aiming for leadership again by 2025 with 18A. making the world's most advanced silicon on U.S. soil. Here's a final thought for you, the listener, based on that packaging bottleneck we discussed. Even if they achieve that goal, if the most advanced wafers are made in Arizona, does that truly solve the geopolitical risk? Or does the need to potentially ship those incredibly valuable cutting-edge wafers back across the Pacific for final packaging just shift the critical choke point further down the line, leaving a significant vulnerability still exposed?
If you enjoy this video, please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell to the later update from my channel. Thank you for watching till the end, and see you in the next video.